All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy Aerospec Awareness Week. Thank you so much for being here today for a really important discussion on amatonormativity, something that often goes unacknowledged by many folks in society and something that's not well understood even within the broader 2S LGBTQIA plus community. So my name is Tai Eye. I'm a PhD candidate focusing on climate science, looking at snow cover, and in my not so ample spare time, I'm a host of the ASPEC podcast, which explores asexuality and aromanticism with a intersectional lens, and looking at, the fact that asexuality and aromanticism are spectrums of experiences, and we cannot account for those lived experiences without, taking into account intersectional experiences. So that's kind of the ASPEC podcast. And it's a little bit about me. Let's introduce our guests today, starting with Justin. Do you want to say hello and let us know a little bit about yourself?
Memoir and essays about my experiences, as well as a book on the tarot from an asexual perspective. No problem.
All right.
Happens to me a lot. So
Yeah. No, it was my fault.
How about we move on for the sake of brevity? I'd like to we can move on to the other folks in the panel, and then we can circle back later.
Okay, sounds good. Willow, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm Willow. I am an integrated master's student at the University of Bristol in the UK, and I study geography with innovation. And I'm currently writing my dissertation on the innovation side, because it's like joint honours, about the negative mental health effects of amatonormativity on aromantic people. So I'm currently in the process of trying to do my research on that, which is really exciting.
Thank you so much, Willow. So glad that you could join us today. And we have also got Heidi joining us from Aurea. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Heidi. I am a university student in Canada, but today I'm here as a team member for Aurea, which, if you don't know what that is, it's the Aromantic Spectrum Union for Recognition, Education, and Advocacy. We're an international aromantic spectrum nonprofit. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
My apologies, AKW. I think everybody else has volume. Let me see. Yeah, it might be on your end. So let's start with a brief introduction of amatonormativity and where it comes from. So the term amatonormativity is a term that was coined by Elizabeth Brake in her 2012 book, Minimizing Marriage, Marriage Morality, and the Law. And it is the assumption that everybody desires to be in a coupled, monogamous, romantic relationship. One such consequence of amatonormativity is that society insists that romantic relationships must be elevated and prioritized above all other kinds of relationships. And not only that, but amatonorms are embedded in the law as the only relationships. So romantic relationships are the only relationships recognized and granted federal statutory provisions. Any other kind of relationship in most places around the world will not be recognized as a legal, quote, relationship. And this is really problematic for a whole host of reasons. And we cannot talk about amatonormativity without ignoring the power structures in which it has evolved under and continues to support. So when we're talking about amatonormativity, we often, in society at least, think of the definition of, quote, the nuclear family, and the related assumption that all relationships are inherently both sexual and romantic. And we often take a cis heteronormative framework to this. There's constructions of gendered relationship norms, and that the assumption of the primary assumption of a relationship in the Western colonial context is reproduction and reproduction alone. And this colonialist Western view of cis heteronormative relationships has been imposed often violently upon colonized states and its constituents. We see explicit linkages here to white supremacy, since in this framework, Western romantic sexual relationships are seen as the most pure, and I'm using this in a very quotational sense, form of relationship. And so amatonormativity has a lot of linkages to all sorts of entrenched power structures and intersects with many things like ableism, allonormativity, the assumption that all relationships must be sexual, and many, many, many other things. One way that this shows up is that, in healthcare, the only folks allowed to be recognized as caregivers generally are those who you may be married to or are living within a nuclear family. Nobody else from, a healthcare perspective can be recognized in many cases as a caregiver. And as a result, it really, amatonormativity frequently erases, and intersects with ableism in many, many ways. We will come and discuss this in further detail, but I want to start with just a general question. What are some of the ways in which amatonormativity has impacted you, and how have you navigated it when you encounter it? That's kind of like the first question I might have. Is there anybody that wants to start with that opening question?
I can start if no one else wants to.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Willow.
So I'm quite young, so I haven't experienced a lot of amatonormativity. I think like that is the typical examples of amatonormativity. because I live in shared housing, live in shared student housing, so that sort of living space is very normalized. I think the main way that I've experienced amatonormativity is more intangible. It's more of when I'm talking to friends and I'm talking about the future. I've had conversations where I've been thinking, oh, it would be really cool if we could live together after university. But these friends were like really positive about it at the start, but then they just casually brought up, oh, of course, eventually I'd move out with my boyfriend. Obviously, we'd live together by ourselves at some point. And I was like, obviously, is that obvious to you? Okay. Which was definitely a weird feeling because I valued these friends and I liked the idea of living with them, especially since for me, I think another part of this intangible amatonormativity is the fear of the future and what sort of future I'll have in relation to my friends, both aromantic other friends and non-aromantic friends, because even with other aromantic people, there isn't the more social expectation that you will go around with them, you'll move in together, if one person wants to move to a different part of the country, you'll move with them like romantic partners have. It's still just friendship, so it doesn't have that same expectation, and it creates a lot of uncertainty in my future, and I think that is the main way that I've been affected.
Absolutely. It shows up frequently as the assumption that aromantic folks are inherently lonely and doomed to be lonely for the rest of their life. That so frequently happens. I've, had folks in my family constantly worry or tell me, "Aren't you lonely?" And, many, many folks all around, all growing up have all commented many times on, you're going to be lonely if you don't get into a relationship. And that is just so frustrating. And that is such a common experience for aspec folks and particularly aromantic folks for sure.
I definitely agree. And I resonate with a lot of what you said, Willow. I think even in addition to all of that, sometimes when making new friends, like if you think that they're allo or you don't really necessarily have a reason to believe they're not allo and they might not know about amatonormativity or really think about these things, then it's hard to really feel like you can invest everything into the interpersonal relationship when there's that worry of, oh, they're just gonna get into a romantic relationship and follow the relationship hierarchy of prioritizing that relationship over every other interpersonal relationship in their life, and sort of just, now we're not really friends anymore. And it's like, is it worth it to invest in that relationship? And of course in many cases it is, but in many cases if somebody doesn't really understand or isn't fully aware, then you don't really know until it happens, and then that's just an unfortunate situation to be in, because you wish that more people understood like what amatonormativity was and how it affects, I mean, not just arrow people, right? Like it affects everyone, including people in, coupled monogamous romantic relationships. Like amatonormativity can affect them to the extent that, if they feel pressured by society to follow certain scripts in their relationship, like if they feel pressure to follow the relationship hierarchy and kind of isolate themselves from the rest of their communities and their networks, then like that's often not a great thing for people either. So, it definitely affects everyone, arrow, spec, and not included.
Absolutely. Amatonormativity certainly um, insist upon many, many societal norms around what relationships should look like, including the fact that you should prioritize above all else your one romantic partner, and that people can start to get jealous if you're spending too much time with your friends, for example. And this is really problematic because the folks deciding what that relationship should look like are the folks within that relationship, not society as a whole dictating what that relationship should be, in quotation mark. Justin, any thoughts?
First of all, can anyone hear me? I think I'm muted.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Chat, can you hear? Can you hear Justin? Yes.
I just have a message again saying that I've been muted. So yeah. Right. Well, as Heidi has mentioned, it's affected me indirectly in the sense that I have had many people in my orbit who have made a lot of connections, a lot of friends, and only to find that their friends, their connections have gone on to that relationship escalator that's been kind of mentioned. And they're off doing their own thing, and my friends are left thinking, well, what happened? What happened to all of these connections that I have? And it's happened to me as well, where I've had people in my life who are very close to me, essentially essentially inadvertently go on that relationship path where they fully invest all of their time and effort into their partner at the expense of their platonic relationship. But I would say, in my own experience, I would say personally, we live in a culture that is, from the ground up, amatonormative. It is that has been front loaded into our consciousness, into our culture, by way of white supremacy, by way of capitalism. This idea that the sexual romantic connection must be prioritized in our lives because that inherently is what is seen as valuable. And in my own life, I grew up with the expectation that I would marry someone that my parents would find socially acceptable, someone within my own ethnic group who would fulfill all of these stereotypical domestic expectations of a wife, and amongst all of the messaging in our society, be it from popular media, from friends and family, the way that our social structures are formed, like in education, in the workplace, just this general idea that the general, again, that general front-loaded idea that the sexual relationship, the romantic relationship is, well, it occupies a place of primacy in our lives. And all other relationships are seen as devalued. And it's really difficult it's been difficult for me to try to achieve a sense of a healthy relationship with myself when I'm expected to find that value, that importance, not in myself, not with friends, but with this mythical, perfect partner that I've been told, is out there waiting for me. And I'm supposed to just kind of, we've all heard these messages in many forms, in many variations in our lives. So much so that they are actually even hard-coded into a lot of the colloquialisms that you see offhandedly used. Plenty of fish in the sea, for example. Yeah, and so I would say that my experience of amatonormativity has been just living in modern Western society. I feel is enough of an experience of that, and then on top of that, encountering it as an aspect of capitalism and of white supremacy.
Absolutely. You brought up some really, really fantastic points. And as you said, it is assumed that no matter what, you will go on to find, quote, that perfect partner. I don't know how many times people have told me that. And I've had folks, even at, pride events, tell me, well, how do you actually know that you're aromantic? Have you not experienced your whole life yet? How do you know you'll never find that perfect person? And it is so infuriating. And it's just so baked into society's assumption that they will not listen to you in many cases when you tell them, no, I know what my identity is, and no, I am not going to find that person. That is not an acceptable answer for most people in society, unfortunately. So I really, really empathize with the amount of frustration that causes, for sure.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because that's a sentiment that is even within the aromantic community itself, in the reference to like queer platonic relationships. I know when I was younger and I first came across that, well, initially I first came across asexuality and was thinking that encompassed both aromanticism and asexuality. Then I found aromanticism a different word. And then I found that some aromantics also partner up when I didn't want to partner up at all. And I know that later on we'll have some discussion about loveless aromantics, but I think that'd be a good thing to bring up here because even um, non-loveless aromantics can have relationships in queer platonic relationships, and so that's also has a weird relationship with non-platonic relationships and how the rest of society sees these relationships. And it's that sentiment of you'll eventually find a partner or you'll eventually find a relationship can still be spread within the aromantic community itself, which is can be quite distressing for some people, I think.
I completely agree with that. I think for me, coming to terms with being aromantic, one of the things that I really felt was like I identify as a non-partnering aromantic, but at the time I didn't know any of these terms. But what I did know was I was never interested in pursuing a romantic relationship or any kind of partnered relationship in the way that a lot of my friends in like middle school, high school, or whatever are already interested in. And identifying as aromantic let me put words to describe why I felt that way. Learning about queer platonic relationships was always like, this is great that some people are interested in this. Like, I can totally see why this would be, you know, something valuable to people. I don't think it's something that's personally valuable to me. But even, you're right, within aromantic communities, there is sometimes a lot of emphasis on people saying, I want to be in a queer platonic relationship. How do I accomplish that? Where do I find someone? Like, and for people who value that, like that's totally, those are all reasonable questions to ask and, wanting to find out more about that. But to me, I can find there's this fixation to the point where it leaves me wondering, like, is me not wanting this like a problem? I know it's not, but that's something that I'd never really questioned before until I actually like started engaging with the community and started realizing how strong of an emphasis was being put on, partnered relationships, even if they're not romantic. And, I know that the definition of amatonormativity is specifically about monogamous romantic relationships. And there's a lot of things that non-romantic relationships like break free from in terms of the societal script and in terms of the expectations, but still it's the core idea of the relationship and why is it something that you want. And for me, realizing that that's really not something that I do want has been a very valuable experience. And I think, that's something that's important for everyone to think about. Like, why is it important to you if it is? And if it's not, why not?
Such a fantastic point, and I'm so glad that both of you kind of brought up and talked about, loveless arrows and those that are non-partnering, because as both of you mentioned, even within aromantic communities, there's a often assumed um, assumption that you desire some sort of partnered relationship, perhaps, or even more generally, just the discussion or the refrain that there are other kinds of love, and that arrows may experience and may feel other kinds of love, but that erases the experience of loveless arrows. And we often do that even within the aromantic community, and I unfortunately have been guilty of it myself when talking about phrase. One of the things I like to carry at Pride is a sign that says, "Not all love is romantic," but therein I'm implicitly saying that arrows all experience some kind of love. That's not the case for everyone, and we often erase the loveless. And I think we also erase aplatonic experiences by making those sorts of statements.
Yeah, along that line, I think we get into quite I don't know what the word for it is, but like other subjects around how humans are social animals, and then you get into the sort of like the mental health side of it and how that all interacts, and it all gets quite complicated because fundamentally, as I said, I think humans, well, are social creatures and do crave social relationships, and it's just what form that relationship takes per person and what they want, and then it's how society then views that relationships which really differentiates them, I think.
Absolutely, and that's going to be different for everyone. Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about, broadly what amatonormativity is and how it shows up in, different ways within society, and, how we even within, aromantic circles perpetuate some aspects of it, even when we don't directly assume, that everyone wants to be in a coupled monogamous relationship. We, in many times, still perpetuate the idea that everybody wants to be in some sort of relationship. And so I think that in itself is an extension or a consequence of amatonormativity. And it has major impacts on mental health and so many other aspects. Do we want to maybe turn gears and think about how amatonormativity is deeply entrenched in, fields like medicine and mental health and those sorts of things? Is this a good time to maybe look at it from that perspective now?
I mean, I'm happy to do so.
All right, let's jump to our next question then. And kind of as a preamble, amatonormativity, as I mentioned or alluded to before, is deeply, deeply entrenched in so many institutions, including medical healthcare and counseling, more generally within mental health fields. It's not uncommon to feel judged for not adhering to societal norms around relationships. I've talked about the fact that I've been questioned not only by family, but, even at pride events that, how do you inherently know that you're aromantic? How do you inherently know you don't want a coupled monogamous romantic relationship? That also extends to medical health care and, many of the assumptions that, are you sexually active? They automatically assume that you are a sexually active being because you're assumed to be in a sexual and romantic relationship. And, it extends in many, many other ways, within medicine. But, even within counseling, I've had, um, counselors say, or suggest to me that you might be suffering because you're lonely, you don't have a partner. That's happened to me, unfortunately. not only once, but many times, talking to non, ASPEC affirming counselors. And I know this is an area of research for you in particular, Willow. And unfortunately, it's such a common occurrence for ASPEC individuals. Are you able to comment on how amatonormativity has impacted your own mental health and well-being, and how it's impacted your ability to navigate, medical and or mental health care appointments, for example?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. I think the main way that amatonormativity has affected my mental health is, as I previously mentioned, my view of the future and sort of my hopefulness in that aspect, because I've seen online a lot of these sort of positive future posts. Never kill yourself. You could end up with a husband in the other room that you can hear reading bedtime stories to your children. And it's like, that wouldn't save me from depression. That sounds awful. I don't want that. And it's those sort of things that really impact how I view my future, and as I said, the hopefulness of it and how positive it is, because I want to keep these social relationships. I want to keep close friendships going forwards, but I don't have the experience to know how realistic it is or how friendships will end up in the future, because I'm a university student, I'm still quite young. It's quite different, I think, the relationships and friendships between people my age and people older from what I've heard, but I don't actually have that experience to then base my view of the future on. And that's really the main area where antinormativity has affected my mental health, because, again, I think being young and most of my medical experiences have been even when I was younger, they never really asked about anything romance related or even sexual related. When I had a few operations, they asked about pregnancy, but they didn't do any pregnancy tests. And so I think I'm at quite the crux between childhood, where they don't really ask or expect romance in the same way that they expect it of adults. So I'm kind of just waiting in anxiety, seeing how or if how it will affect my future medical areas, but I don't actually have any tangible experience or evidence of that yet.
That's absolutely fair, but it's also so incredibly true. You bring up the fact that so many of these forward-looking posts assume this, coupled monogamous relationship that will somehow magically appear no matter what. And that, we're assumed that that is the epitome of, this is how you find yourself. The trope, the common movie trope is the happily ever after. The person is immature, they don't know themselves until they find the right partner. That is almost always the Hollywood trope, and it's so pervasive throughout society. Any thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to a point you mentioned earlier about getting questions from people about how you know. Uh, how do you actually know that you are who you say you are? And it's that kind of, well, there's a term for that. I don't quite remember exactly, but it's that kind of metaphysical, existentialist kind of question that always refers to, well, those questions are never really asked in good faith, are they? They're never asked in a manner that is, they're often asked in context that is supportive or affirming. And so, I don't know, life's too short for questions like that. If people are not willing to accept or to accept how you identify, if people are not willing to your lived experience as a queer person, well, that means that clearly they're not people who deserve to be in your space. And they're not people who deserve your energy and attention. I understand that not everyone is in a position to cut off people like that, to not to be to cut loose people like that because they may be in context in social contexts where they have to be in extended contact with people like family, um, coworkers, but yeah, I think it just kind of highlights the importance of having really strong and healthy boundaries around yourself and around your own experience. There are a lot of people in our world who really want to deny us our experience, and they want to deny us our identity.
They want to deny us our own path, our own independent path towards self-actualization, because it serves their agenda to try to impose whatever view of the world they have on other people. So yeah, I mean, block, just block them, really. Yeah, that's the main thought that I have right now.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I apologize. I was trying to fiddle around with the audio a little bit because your mic went a little bit warbly, and I figured out that if I listened to your audio on Video Ninja, it helped a little bit. But yeah, I really like that last point you brought up for sure. If they don't respect your boundaries, there's no need to keep them in your life. And as Laura said, just block them. You don't need to deal with them. I apologize. I missed some of it because of I think there was a connectivity issue for a little bit. Trying to see how I can recap this. I only sort of half heard it myself, so I do apologize. My apologies, Justin. We seem to be having some audio issues. Yeah, Laura, good point. We can't argue with people that aren't coming at it from good faith and from a place of respect. Absolutely. Any thoughts? Any additional thoughts, Heidi? No, that's all right. Yeah, unfortunately, the weather's been a real issue the last few days here. We had freezing rain yesterday. I know that my internet is not always the best either. I often get it cutting in and out, so I do apologize as well.
On the topic of mental health, I'm happy to talk about a little bit about my research on
Absolutely.
this.
Feel free to jump in.
So, one thing that I found quite interesting about my initial research a few months ago was I sent out an anonymous survey. I got about 29 respondents, and a theme which I found the most interesting was how a lot of people spoke about how they did experience loneliness as one of the issues they found. But at the same time, a lot of people said in my additional questions box that they didn't like the stereotype that we're lonely. And obviously, that seems like quite the oxymoron between people are feeling lonely, but they also don't want to be stereotyped as lonely, in the sense of that you're not lonely because you lack a romantic relationship. You're lonely because society and amatonormativity has put so much pressure on solely romantic relationships that without that, you do lack a lot of social connection that non-aromantic people have. And I just found that really interesting when I was researching this. I currently haven't had the chance to talk to mental health professionals myself yet. That's later on this month. But I think mental health is quite the interesting aspect of this because in the AUREA survey from 2020, it's had I think 13% of respondents said they faced difficulty accessing mental health care or being accepted by mental health professionals. And that was higher than medical professionals, which was about 4%. Yet at the same time, with my initial quite surface level research into mental health professionals, my instincts would be I feel like these people should be in a position to be quite open to this because they're mental health professionals, they're therapists, they're trained in diversity. Like I've really only been researching into UK mental health professionals because I am based in the UK. But like the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, I read their best practices guide for gender diversity and equality and GDEI. I forget the acronym they used, but they spoke about aromanticism. They spoke about relationship anarchy. They spoke about polyamorous people in their best practices, and a lot of therapists that I've been looking at on different registers are open to discussing sexuality, being queer positive. A lot of them are quite progressive from what I've seen surface level. And I find it quite interesting, this, again, discrepancy between what aromantic people are experiencing versus what the surface level looking at mental health professionals would suggest. And I'm just excited to further explore that and try and find where this discrepancy comes from and just figure out more details about this mental health stuff. I really enjoy it as a dissertation topic.
I'm very excited to find out more as you continue to progress with your research. It's a really good point that you bring up that you've got a lot of therapists that may be queer affirming, but they only have a very surface level understanding of aromanticism and may not necessarily be fully aware of their biases when it comes to assumptions around, allonormative and amatonormative assumptions around relationships. So, really good point. Just looking at the time here, it might be a good time to take a quick break, I think. And I can roll ads and maybe just double check what's going on with the audio here. So why don't we take a short little break? I'll run the ads. I'll grab some more water and we'll be back in, say, 5 or so minutes. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right. See you soon. All right, folks. Thank you so much for sticking around for the break. I think we've figured out possibly a solution for some of the audio issues we had. So I think at this point, we can think about, Valentine's Day and its relationship to amatonormativity, especially given, it just happened, and the fact that it is no mere coincidence that Aerospec Awareness Week happens the first full week after Valentine's Day. It's a very good reminder that, hey, maybe that thing that capitalism and society is so obsessed about is not the ultimate desire for everyone. And, Valentine's Day and amatonormativity really push this idea that the only relationship worth celebrating, the only relationship that capitalism tells us is the one to buy for, is the romantic and often sexual one. And it really is not only harmful to the ASPEC community, but those who are single. It erases, polyamorous and ethical non-monogamous experiences, and so many others. I love to poke fun at Valentine's Day, and just to remind folks that, hey, maybe I'm not actually looking forward to Valentine's Day, and so I'll cheekily say, it's just cheap chocolate Eve. Just to remind folks that, hey, maybe Valentine's Day isn't it for everyone. Can you comment a little bit on, how amatonormativity and Valentine's Day are, interlinked, and, the role that capitalism and other entrenched power structures play when it comes to, I guess, Valentine's Day?
I guess I can start on this one.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Valentine's Day is something that a lot of corporations push to try and sell things to people for the holiday. And you know what? I think my personal view on it is there's nothing wrong with people who value romance and romantic relationships in their lives having a day to celebrate those relationships in their lives. I think something you see a lot amongst non-aerospec people is people feeling pressure to do certain things because it's Valentine's Day. Like, oh, I have to get flowers, I have to get chocolate. Like, if I don't do a grand gesture of romance, then I can't prove to my romantic partner that I love them, and therefore they're going to hate me and whatever. And, I am not the expert on romantic love whatsoever, but I would like to think that romantic love is not about grand gestures because there's this holiday that society decided there was going to be, and therefore you must follow what society tells you to do on that day to prove yourself to someone else. Like, I think it's a much more personal thing than that. But yeah, like, especially for aromantic folks and also other people who don't fit the mold of Valentine's Day, as you mentioned, it can also be an isolating experience to see everybody else be very excited about it. And like, whether it's in a genuine, that's something they care about way, or in a, I must follow the societal expectations and participate in this kind of way. If you're someone who's just like, I'm going to opt out of this, then other people look at you kind of funny. I mean, one thing that even happened recently at my university was our like queer student service, who are really awesome in supporting queer students at the school, but they put up a Valentine's Day / Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week poster board, trying to celebrate both at the same time, posing the question to people, what does love mean to you? As a question that's supposed to be about both Valentine's Day and Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week. And, Arrow Week is not about what love means to you. It's about celebrating the aromantic community, which includes loveless arrows who will not answer that question in the way that you're expecting. And just to think that those are two things that go together undermines the idea of Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week as a whole. And again, this is not to say that there's anything inherently wrong with having a holiday to celebrate romantic relationships for people who do like value having that. But yeah, just this is a week to celebrate people on the aromantic spectrum. And we do intentionally have that after Valentine's Day because of the impacts that it does have.
Certainly, there's absolutely this element of FOMO, and capitalism wants you to have that element of FOMO, to think that, hey, if you don't spend, lavishly on this day, you're a bad person and inherently not, doing all you can to fulfill your duty to your partner. But why does it have to be February 14th? And as you said, romance is not at all evil, and romance is absolutely valid. But the way that we force it upon folks through amatonormativity and tell everyone that, you know, if you don't celebrate it on the 14th, then, you know, you're missing out, or you aren't, you know, you are somehow not, you know, fulfilling your duty to your partner. That is evil. That is problematic. And that's certainly very much, you know, intertwined with many, many assumptions. And welcome on in, self-titled. It's good to see you. And I talked earlier this week, we had kind of an overview chat about amatonormativity, about decentering romance on, you know, Valentine's Day weekend. And I really wanted to stress to folks, hey, romance is not inherently evil. Romance is absolutely valid. And the relationship escalator, if it works for you, is absolutely valid. The part that is not, you know, is not it, is that you assume that this is what everybody else wants. And that if you don't follow it to the T, then somehow you are missing out, you're lonely, you're this, you're that, you're not fulfilling your duty to capitalism and all the things that go along with it.
One thing I'd like to say about what you said, Heidi, is that I think aromanticism and loveless aromanticism are still a relationship to love. And I think the question of asking, what does love mean to you, is an interesting question. I don't necessarily think it would be just the association with romance. That's one of the downfalls of the English language, is that we really only have the word love, and that can mean many different things to many different people without the nuance that maybe other languages have. And as aromantics, as loveless aromantics, love is still in the name, and I think that it would be less so the fault of the question itself and more so the fault of people proposing that question if they wouldn't expect a more loveless view or answer to that question, I think. So I quite like that question. It does propose quite an interesting conversation starter, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the purpose of it was to pose the question, you know, what does love mean, including and in addition to romantic love, which is a question that is posed often. And one of the things you hear a lot when people try to validate aromantic experiences, if that's the right word, is when people say, oh, well, aromantic people can also love. They still love their friends and their family. And it's this idea that love is what makes us human. And if you don't love, then that's a terrible thing. And you're right. It is the English language has this overloaded word that means a lot of different things. And it doesn't resonate with everyone and their experiences. And that's a pretty radical thing to say to a lot of people, I think. But if the idea of love doesn't resonate with you, that's not inherently a wrong thing. You know, like you're still as much of a human as anyone else, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. But even that is a relationship to love, and you'll have a unique opinion on love that's still like it's revolving around love. However unfortunate that may be.
Absolutely. You know, that is a really good point. It is a relationship to love. It's not the one that, you know, the university center was necessarily thinking of when they asked that question. But it is, in fact, a relationship to love, just a very different and absolutely 1000% valid one. But I do want to return to this idea that, the word love in the English language typically only means romantic. And if we talk about love in other languages, some of the Latin based languages, love can have many, many different meanings, and there's many different words to describe different kinds of love. So that is a really good point, that the English language is so limited in the way that we speak about the term love. It's always assumed to be sexual, and it's always assumed to be romantic. So that is another good point.
Well, I think it's not always assumed to be those things, but I think when it is used to refer to other things, it is used as, oh, this is also another use case for it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's never, these are all equal. It's here is the main meaning of it, and here are the other meanings of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. One of the things that I've seen more and more, I would say in the last 10 or so years, and particularly in the last 5 years, are some of these alt Valentine's Day kinds of events like Palentine's Day, which, focuses around platonic relationships and celebrating those. And I mentioned that I actually just participated last weekend in a Palentine's themed rain train where I took the time to talk about amatonormativity, talk about relationship anarchy, and talk about ways that we can decenter romance on Valentine's Day. But as you mentioned, that many of these events still don't account for the loveless arrow and the aplatonic experiences. Is there a way that we can dismantle the inherent amatonormative assumptions of days like Valentine's Day and work to make that weekend or that holiday more inclusive of all experiences? Or are we kind of doomed when it comes to Valentine's or alt Valentine's type events?
That's quite an interesting topic, I think, because you have to get down to what would be your end goal with trying to break down some of these assumptions? Would it be trying to open up Valentine's Day to every form of love, however limited that word is? Would it be just trying to expand the day to platonic relationships as well as romantic? Would it be within that, would that be Valentine's Day and Palentine's Day as like side by side things? Would it be trying to merge them together? Would you want, with the aplatonic aromantic people, would you want to try and open that up to non-platonic, non-romantic relationships, whatever form that would be? Because I'm of the opinion that I don't think everything needs to be open for everyone in that sort of way, because I think, as we were saying earlier, Valentine's Day, celebration of romantic love, is its own valid thing. In my opinion, what I think needs to be broken down is the assumption that everyone would partake in it and that it isn't just a holiday for some people. Would be my opinion, I think.
I agree with that. I think trying to open up an occasion to a larger group that it was never originally intended for is never going to break down the actual underlying issue at hand, which is that this holiday in the first place was being forced onto everyone. It's just another way of trying to force it onto everyone, if that makes sense. So I agree with you, Willow. And I agree that there's nothing wrong with having a day that celebrates romantic relationships, and that the issue at hand is really having those alternatives. And I think, Ty, as you mentioned, there are like Palentine's Day events, sort of alternative events for people who don't necessarily resonate with or want to center this idea of Valentine's Day, but still want to do something. And I think for some people that's really helpful. And I think for some people it's not necessarily helpful either. So personally, I see nothing wrong with that because some people might just not want to partake at all in anything for that occasion. And some people might want to participate in different ways. I mean, maybe the way I think about it is a little bit in the way that like Western society views holidays like Christmas. Like, you know, not everybody celebrates Christmas, but it is definitely something that is pushed very hard onto people. And, you know, the right wing really likes to, you know, be like, oh, you can't even say Merry Christmas anymore or whatever. Like, just like that, like centering that Christian holiday, I guess, in a very similar way, I think, to the way that, you know, allocentric people center Valentine's Day. And so I think in the same vein as people are more and more aware that people celebrate other holidays around a similar time as Christmas that have no relation to Christmas itself as a holiday, or people can celebrate Christmas in ways that aren't like in the religious way that people who originally celebrate Christmas do. So I don't know if that makes sense. I think the same can go for kind of any occasion really. Like people can participate in whatever way feels right for them, and regardless of the situation, we shouldn't be, you know, forcing people to partake in anything in any particular way, whether that is the traditional Valentine's Day or any other kind of related event.
Absolutely. You brought up a really good point, and, you know, one that I definitely missed when crafting this question, because it's not just about Valentine's Day necessarily. It's this assumption that everybody must be forced to partake in it. You know, so bringing up the analogy of, you know, forcing people to celebrate, you know, Christmas or Easter or all these other holidays that are very much um, forced or very much a big part of the Western North American calendar. You bring up a really good analogy or point there as well. Thank you for the hydrate reminders. I will definitely grab a drink of water here. But yeah, also the idea that it's not inherently bad that you want to celebrate or center romance if that's what you want to center on that day. But the fact that you try to force it on folks, or that you think that that's what everybody wants, that's where the problem in there lies. Any other thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just wanted to check if folks can hear me okay. Oh my. Right, okay. So I'm going to move my head over to the side of my computer.
So sorry.
Right. So, this question of Valentine's Day, why do we just assume that one day has to completely define our relationships, our connections to people? And why do we accept that the Western white-centric model of relationships, of connections to people, has to define how we see our relationships, how we see our connections to people? I think personally that going to the heart of your question about Valentine's Day and amatonormativity, I have started to think of it a lot like the process of decolonization. And how do we decolonize ourselves? Well, we learn. We read the stories and life experiences of other aromantic people and other asexual and aspec people. We read books about relationships that allow us to open up our expectations of what a relationship looks like. Um, I know that David J., I think, was involved with one book that just came out that talked about that. I know that Cody Daigle Oriens just released a book about relationships for aspec people. I think that deprogramming ourselves from this very narrow and as very well stated by Willow and Heidi, a very capitalist idea of Valentine's Day. I think what we can do is just open, just on an individual level in our own experience, pursue learning and pursue being open to new experiences of love and relationships. And from that, we can decouple this idea that February the 14th has to be this one day where romance is centered. Um, like just kind of throwing ideas out there. I mean, why not make February the 14th a time where you think, hey, I haven't connected with these people in a while. I haven't sent this person a message on Discord or Instagram. I really need to like check up on them. Yesterday I was, well, I think close to the 14th. I was reading in the news about the U.S. military buildup against Iran, and I just thought, I should check up on my Iranian friends, on the on the people I've known who have family there. Um, it's gestures like that on an individual basis that help us to remember that um, the the human spectrum of relationship experience need not and cannot be limited to this very I'm very tempted to say like Victorian Western European idea of love being solely the domain of romance and sex. Um, because as has been mentioned again by Heidi and Willow, the term love uh, encompasses a huge range of emotional attachment and emotional connection to people. C.S. Lewis talks about how there are different kinds of love, and it goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, how they also recognized different forms of love. Um, I think um, at its very core, it's just a matter to me of putting in the effort to foster healthier connections with oneself and healthy connections with other people. It means showing up for our friends, showing up for people we've just met, people who we may not know all that well, in addition to people that we've known for a long time. And also, most importantly of all, of course, showing up for ourselves. And yeah, that's kind of how I see it. Um, I think, like, the more I think about it, the more I see a lot of the ce- centering of romance and the very narrow definition of love um, being a being a tool to atomize our society, to focus on increasingly more on the individual, when now more than ever, we need to focus on being, we need to focus, I would argue, we need to focus more on us as a collective, on us existing in a matrix of other people around us, and embracing the idea of human connection as something other than just simple romance and sexuality. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I really like your emphasis on trying to step away from like the American individualism and towards more community. I really resonate with that.
100% agree. This idea that, love is inherently romantic and sexual is very much the Victorian or Western colonial definition, but it's not the only definition, and it's not the one that we should be forcing upon everyone. And I really like the point you bring up that, maybe then, instead of just focusing on romance or sexual love on that day, think about, our entire community coming together, or, reaching out to folks that you may not have reached out to in a long time, and looking at it from a radically different perspective that rejects this Western capitalist colonialist type of lens when it comes to the word love. So really, really like the points you brought up, Justin. So the last question that I want to cover here is, coming back to this idea that even within aspec spaces, the loveless aromantic and the aplatonic experiences are often forgotten about, often ignored. I've unfortunately been guilty of it myself when I say things like, not all love is romantic, because I'm implicitly saying that everybody, therefore, must experience some kind of love. But that's not correct. And I think that we need to make that much clearer and create space to talk about those experiences more during, Aerospec Awareness Week. And it's not something I can speak to myself, because I experience platonic love, I experience platonic attraction. But can you think of ways to, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this, but how do we better account for aplatonic and loveless experiences during Aerospec Week and make it a, I guess, move away from just saying things like, not all love is romance, which inherently assumes that everybody experiences some form of love. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 'Cause, I mean, I
Yeah,
think
I'm
it's
happy to
quite.
start with.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can go. You can go, Willow.
'Cause, I mean, I think first of all, I'd like to challenge your assumption that you're saying that when you said that not all love is romantic, I don't think that implicitly implies that everyone feels love. I think that's just talking about love as a category, then saying not everything within that category is romantic, but not that everyone falls within that category, would be my interpretation of what you said, would be my first point to challenge about that. But Heidi, you can go with what you were going to say.
I mean, I can kind of see that both ways also. Like, I think, Ty, in that case, it's totally okay for you to speak about your own experiences in saying that, I think. right? Like, I think if you're saying, I experience love, but not romantically, therefore not all love is romantic. Like, those are just all true statements, right? Um, I think if you're not trying to, push it onto other people as a depiction of what they might experience, then, other people are allowed to express their own experiences in their own ways as well. I don't think you're necessarily trying to speak for anyone else, let alone, all aromantics in that respect. Um, I think even within the loveless and aplatonic communities, there is a lot of diversity of experience. I mean, I can't really speak to aplatonicism because I do experience platonic attraction, but I do identify as loveless, and my experiences aren't necessarily what you might stereotypically expect from someone who says, I identify as a loveless arrow, which is why I am kind of hesitant to identify this way and have thought about it for a long time. Like, I don't really go around like just saying that, but the more that I think about it, the more that I'm like, that does resonate with me, because I don't label my feelings for other people as love. Like, maybe if really pressed by other people and forced to name them, I would, but not really of my own volition. Like, I care deeply about my friends and the people that I do care about. I experience platonic attraction in many situations. Like, those aren't necessarily the experiences that people like necessarily think of when they think of someone who doesn't experience love. Like, they think of someone who's robotic and like unfeeling and cold, and some people might exhibit many of those characteristics, and that doesn't make them any less valid as people. But like, I'm not those things. So I think, actually, even the other day, I was reading up. I wish I could remember where it was because then I could link it here. But I was reading about the experiences of loveless versus non-loveless aromantics, and amongst non-loveless aromantics, the vast majority said they experienced platonic attraction, i.e., are not aplatonic. But amongst loveless arrows, it was like, I think about 50-50, or maybe most loveless arrows do identify as aplatonic and not experiencing platonic attraction. So even in that regard, like, I'm like, oh, like, my experiences are also different in that regard. um I don't know, where was I, what was the question?
I think basically just how do we, as a broader ASPEC community, become
Oh yeah.
better at acknowledging, the loveless and the aplatonic experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, okay. So I think platonic attraction is one of the things that a lot of people will try to explain to alloromantic people when first explaining aromanticism to them. They'll say, oh, like, there's platonic attraction, aesthetic attraction. They name all the other types of non-romantic, non-sexual attraction as these are all types of attraction that people can feel. Um, Sometimes there's not enough clarification that not everyone experiences all of those things. Not all aromantics experience platonic, aesthetic, etc. attractions. Not all alloromantic people experience all of those forms of attraction either. It's a very easy way to tell alloromantics, hey, we're not so different from you because we still experience attraction in all of these ways. Same with the idea of love. It's easy to say, oh, yeah, but aromantics also love their friends. It's saying, hey, we're not so different from you. We experience the same things as you, anyways. And on one hand, sometimes that's what you need to bridge the gap with people who don't understand, like, especially for aromantics and aromantic spectrum people who have those experiences, saying these are my experiences and this is how I can relate to your experiences, even though they're not exactly the same, is totally a good thing for them to do from a human connection perspective. At the same time, those aren't generalizations that you can make about everyone within the aromantic community. So I think it's coming back to what we've said this whole time, which is that, your own individual experience is valid, and it's great for you to share that with other people if that's what you want to do. but you can never assume that your individual experience is what other people, even similar to you, are necessarily experiencing, because inevitably that's just not always going to be the case.
My apologies, I was muted there. Really, really good point. Bringing up that, just because you experience that particular, type of attraction, or you might experience platonic love, doesn't mean that everybody else, therefore, necessarily does. And, that's why it's really important to talk about aromanticism being a spectrum, and a diverse spectrum of experiences, because there is no one universal aromantic experience, just like there's no one universal experience as a human, if you will. So, it's a really good point that you bring up, and it's really coming back to this idea of aromanticism being a spectrum of experiences. But I kind of bring it back to the phrase, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The same thing can be applied to anything. If you've met one aromantic person, you've met one aromantic person with their own unique experience, and it's not going to be the same for everybody that's aromantic. Really, really good point.
Yeah, I think to feed into that, because I think I think I have similar experiences to Heidi in that I did go through a phase of identifying as loveless, and I have similar opinions about the experience of being loveless. But to add on to that, I think is also quite an interesting relationship with neurodiversity, because I have ADHD, and I think that quite affects my emotions, which obviously love is an emotion in a sense. And it also affects, I think, my platonic attraction, because I wouldn't really describe anything that I feel towards my friends as attraction. In my understanding of the word, it just doesn't suit what I experience. And I think part of that is in relation to my neurodiversity, in how also my perception of friends and friendship, because I know obviously a lot of people, they miss their friends, they miss anybody that they care about, but my relationship to that sort of object permanence of even just missing someone is really different than what I think the normal experience is, because I don't think I experience missing someone like other people do, and I think that's mostly from my neurodivergence, weird object permanence, memory, something, something. And that definitely interacts with my aromanticism as well, because it's this platonic attraction aspect of that relatability to alloromantic people. And I think that is an interesting aspect of this spectrum of experiences as well, is how it interacts with neurodiversity.
Definitely. I can certainly relate on that aspect. And I think, the way that I experience platonic, or, I experience friendships, I experience acquaintances, is very much influenced by my neurodiversity. And I'm speaking on my own experience alone here. And I want to, reiterate the point that aromanticism and neurodiversity are completely separate from one another. And your aromanticism is not dictated by your neurodiversity. I think I'm here saying that for me, I think that the way that as a neurodiverse individual experience connections with others may be different from the neurotypical experience. And for me, I think that certainly contributes to some of my lived experience as an aromantic person. So, really good point that you bring up there. Any additional thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, just wanted to check to see if folks can hear me okay.
I can hear you, but you're quiet still, as same as before.
Yeah, okay. Well, so to go directly to the question, for community organizers, I think it just starts with asking people in the community, what are your experiences, and how can we better serve and include you? Open up spaces like this for people who are loveless arrows to speak to their lived experience. Open up spaces where loveless arrows and other more marginalized groups within the ASPEC community can come together and provide mutual support. Just foster that sense of curiosity and just ask about how our groups, how our communities, how our spaces can serve you better, can make you feel more included and appreciated as part of the wider community. And then turning that around, I think also amongst just us as individuals, to also ask, hey, what about this group of people? I wonder if this group of people might not be fully represented in whatever event we're holding or whatever materials we're producing. Keeping that conversation afloat, keeping that conversation visible, to plant that seed in other people's minds to rethink their assumptions about what it means to be ace or arrow, to really further broaden their definitions, broaden their preconceived notions to include other marginalized members of our community. Yeah, I think that's where it starts. I think also part and parcel of that is how I think it's less of an issue in offline spaces, but in my experience in online spaces, there is often a tendency that I've observed towards what people on Twitter have called like pancake discourse, where it's like, oh, you like you like pancakes? Well, you must hate waffles. And then everything else flows from there. We as individuals, we're all imperfect. We're all flawed. None of us are infallible. And we're all working on trying to expand our to expand our knowledge, to expand our awareness. And so, not that I'm calling out anyone specifically here, but just speaking to, again, my own experience of online ASPEC spaces, when people say things online or when an event is announced and people are, and there's no acknowledgement of people on the margins in the ASPEC community, there's often this tendency to assume, oh, you must be willingly trying to erase insert group here. You must be willingly trying to exclude or erase the experiences of insert group here. And yeah, out of that, I think that it's just important for us to extend some measure of grace, some measure of compassion and understanding. If we're talking about A-spec spaces, A-spec communities, we're already existing in the matrix of other AROs, other ACE people. We're already, to some extent, on the same page with regards to amatonormativity and compulsory sexuality and our own shared struggle in that. And so I just think it's in cases like that, and thankfully I've not encountered many cases like that recently. I think that's partially because I've left Twitter entirely. But I think it's also kind of a worthwhile mentality, not just for our community, but the queer community as a whole, for progressive leftist spaces as a whole, to just to remember that we're all in it together. We're all on the same journey of learning it together, and all of us are in different spaces, different stages, different pathways of understanding the ACE and the ARO experience. And I think that's just so important because we live at a time where our communities, our queer communities, our ACE and ARO communities are facing so much external pressure, political and social pressure. There is a rising right-wing movement in Canada, and of course in Canada we are facing down the potential of military annexation from the US. In the US, there's been a massive upsurgence of queerphobia, which I don't think I need to really go into much detail of. And in the UK, there's already talk of their own version of Project 2025, with their own version of ICE, alongside the seemingly the tidal wave almost of queerphobia and anti-trans hate. And so I just feel like, as a whole, our communities need to focus on unity. We need to focus on rallying around each other and showing up for each other, and showing up for the more marginalized and more vulnerable of us. And this extends not just to loveless AROs, but to Black trans people, Black trans women, for instance. I think this question is such an important one because it really encourages us to think not just with respect to one marginalized group within the ASPEC community, but how we can think of how we can think of the whole queer community itself.
Thank you so much, and that's such a great point, because this extends to, and this extends far beyond just thinking about loveless or aplatonic experiences, but more broadly about queer, trans, other marginalized experiences as a whole. And I really, really am glad that you brought that up, because every one of those experiences is going to be different. You're going to experience, your lived experience is going to be impacted by those intersectional identities that you have, that myself as a white male presenting ARO ace is going to, I have an immense amount of privilege compared to many folks who are in the queer community, Black trans folks, BIPOC folks. My experience as an ARO person is going to be vastly different, and we need to account for those intersectional identities whenever talking about ACE, ARO, or queer experiences. So thank you so much for bringing that up. That's it for questions that I have. Was there anything else that folks wanted to add before we wrap here?
I think that was a really good point to end it off on.
Absolutely. That was such a fantastic way to kind of conclude it on. I'm 100% in agreement. Thank you so much again to everyone. Thank you so much, Justin, Willow, Heidi. Thank you to everybody that's been participating in the chat with us today. I encourage you to check out some of the resources that I'm linking here on, decentering romance, on amatonormativity. Highly encourage you to check these out. And just thank you so much again for sharing your experiences and chatting with us today. Don't think we'll go on a raid today. I think we'll end off the stream here. But I want to give a huge shout out to Justin, Willow, and Heidi again. Thank you so much. For those of you that do want to share where we can find you on the socials, feel free to do so. Let us know where we can find you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I do not have any social media to share.
No.
I can go next.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I don't have anything personally, but on the Aurea side, you can check us out at aromanticism.org and also on Instagram at Aurea_aromantic. Also, we are currently running our Aromantic Spectrum Awareness Week fundraiser. You can find that on our website as well. But we are preparing to launch a book about aromantic lived experiences coming out later this year. And so this fundraiser will contribute to the publication of that. So that's very exciting if you want to check that out. All of the information is on our website, aromanticism.org.
I'm going to see if I can.
And
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and I was going to say, for me, if folks want to find me, I am on Blue Sky, where I post slightly unhinged thoughts about current politics and writing and the ASAW community and everything in between. I can be found at jancheta25.bsky.social. So that's jancheta25. And on Instagram, I am Rampancy, Rampancy. That's a marathon/Halo reference for all you Bungie gamers out there. And yeah, that's where I'm most active.